In 2025, 90% of developers are using AI daily, spending an average of 2 hours on coding, documentation, and automation. Teams with strong processes like version control, observability, and small batch delivery are seeing big benefits. 80% of reports are seeing faster delivery, 59% are better outcomes. But AI also magnifies weaknesses. Teams with poor processes face more friction, burnout, and rework. Simply put, AI boosts performance, but paired with discipline, a DevOps continuous learning processes. I'm Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead and principal analyst for application development. I'm joined by Nathan from Google. Nathan, how you doing?
Hey, Paul, good to see you. And hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Harvey. I lead up DORA, which is a program out of Google Cloud. You might have heard of it. It's a research program that looks into how do teams get better at all kinds of different things. It's mainly technology-driven teams, but we want to help them get better at delivering and operating software.
Nathan, it's always great to be talking with you. It's always great to be having you on and having these conversations. It's incredibly important as we start moving into productivity and production and such. But we're looking at the 2025 DORA report. It's now titled State of the AI-Assisted Software Development, right? But this really highlights how AI is reshaping software engineering, right? And with 90% of developers using AI daily, technology is really accelerating delivery, improving code quality, and really transforming teams' roles. Yet the research makes it clear AI amplifies both strengths and weaknesses, right? So that was one of the things we talked about. And teams with strong DevOps practices are really thriving, while those with weak processes face friction, burnout, technical debt, and other things that are really causing issues. So the success depends on a combination of AI with disciplined workflows, continuous learning, and thoughtful governance. So Nathan, let's start by exploring a couple of different things. When we look at the 2025 report, right, it highlights how AI is central amplifier in software development, its capabilities to improve productivity, code quality, and team performance, but it also magnifies those inefficiencies. What do you think would be the best way to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, I think it is really important that as we think about how an organization is building, delivering, and operating software, like it's important to think about all of the components that go into that. You know, we've spent a lot of time over the last 18, 24, 36 months or so, really using AI a lot to help us generate code. But as we saw last year in the 2024 report, what we saw last year was that as you use more AI in your software delivery lifecycle, actually throughput and stability were both falling off. Now, this year we've seen throughput turn around. We're able to ship things more quickly and more frequently, but we still see those challenges with software delivery instability. In other words, we're rolling back things more often or having to push forward a hot fix, something along those lines. But I think it's really important that teams start to look, like I said, across that entire system. You know, if we spend all of our time using AI just to generate code, we're not actually addressing all of the systemic concerns that we might have. Just think about what is the journey that a line of code has to take in order to get to production. One of those steps along the way is the code review process. This is a place that oftentimes is a bottleneck for teams and is a great place where AI can lean in and help, potentially speeding up those code reviews and even providing higher quality code reviews. And it's those feedback cycles that become really, really important.
Yeah, I agreed. And, I think there's other pieces that we have to talk about here is, how companies avoid pitfalls that lead to burnout or even technical debt, right? I think that's a big part of it. But with 90% of respondents in the survey say that they use AI daily for coding, documentation, and workflow automation, the role of developers or development in general is clearly shifting towards oversight, strategic decision-making, and AI skill development, right? And there's a lot here, but this is kind of near and dear to my heart, Nathan, because when I think about the skill gap issues and how how this is evolving, AI is allowing for accelerated productivity, but that means that there's more responsibilities going on to the developer, right? So how do you see these roles evolving and impacting in hiring, training, maybe even long-term career paths for software engineers in the next few years?
Yeah, I think you're definitely seeing some real signals there, Paul. The work is starting to change. And in fact, one of the things that we see is that it's the teams that are most user-centric, that really understand why are we building and who are we building for, those teams tend to have the best performance. And so when I think about the role of a software engineer and how that's starting to change, I just bring that finding into the perspective or into the consideration. And what that leads me to is, as a software engineer, my job isn't necessarily to write code. I mean, that's an important tool that I have, but my real job is to satisfy the needs of a user. And in order to do that, I have to, I'm probably engineering, I'm building something, but I have to understand, what does the user need? What is this big problem we're trying to solve? And how do I take this larger problem and break it down into smaller chunks of things that I can actually accomplish? And really starting to think more like an architect and more like a team lead as a software engineer is how I think this work is changing quite significantly.
Well, Nathan, let's talk about that. In this year's report, we see the introduction of the concept of a team architect, right? You were just talking about that a little bit, but this is also the reworking rate metric, right? It highlights the AI adoption that amplifies both strengths and weaknesses in the teams themselves and the team performance. So from your perspective, with the data that came out of this year's study, how should engineering leaders assess that or tailor the AI integration strategies for different team architects, really to maximize the productivity, but minimize that burnout and friction that we were just talking about?
Yeah, that is really important. And it is one of those things that we did in this year's report. We kind of took a more holistic look at teams, and we wanted to understand things like team performance, product performance, software delivery performance, of course, but also individual effectiveness. How much time as an individual do you feel like you're spending on valuable work? How much friction do you encounter throughout your workday? And what's your burnout like? And in doing this, we actually looked across, we had, nearly 5,000 survey respondents. We were able to look across all of these teams and do some cluster analysis to understand, are there different shapes of teams? With everyone adopting AI, we actually found 7 different archetypes or profiles of teams. Everyone from teams that we call foundational challenges or the legacy bottleneck through to pragmatic performers and harmonious high achievers. And I think from a leadership perspective, one of the best things that you can do here is kind of assess across those characteristics, how is your team doing? And then go out and identify the weak spots, the areas for huge opportunities for improvement. And then you layer on another thing that we introduced this year, which is our AI capabilities model. That AI capabilities model really seeks to answer the question, it's not if we're using AI, but how we're using AI. And so as an example, maybe you identify that your team is light on product performance, and that's a big opportunity for you to improve. You want to use more AI, you want to improve product performance. What are the capabilities or conditions that we could have in place that will amplify the impact of AI on product performance? And that's where the capabilities model comes in and shows you those 2, 3, 4 different capabilities or conditions that you need to have in place.
Yeah, Nathan, that's a healthy end count with 5,000 respondents. So you can do data cuts in any way you want to do it, which is really, really important, I think. And when I was reading through it, I found it really interesting because the report emphasizes the socio-cognitive impact of AI itself. Right, it really was showing the developers' role was shifting from creators to curators, right? Pulling things together, making things happen, focusing more on prompt engineering, code review, and oversight. Not really surprising because they're leveraging the tools that are available to them. But when we look at this, I think the other part of the study that I was trying to understand is how can organizations balance AI-driven efficiency gains and those skill development with the psychological safety to ensure sustainable team performance over the long term? Because this is a factor that I think that, you can kind of it goes back to not just burnout, but it goes back to every aspect of using, AI to kind of drive your results. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important insight for leadership as well, because we need leaders that are leaning into this, not just looking for ways to cut costs or just drive pure efficiency by the numbers. We have to think of efficiency as a long-term investment, and that long-term investment includes the people in our organizations, which will require that we give them time and space to learn new skills, that we as an organization start thinking about new ways of doing work. And so I think that's what's really, really important here, Paul, is that we're bringing leaders into this conversation, and leaders that really understand how work gets done today and potentially can help us reimagine how we're going to do that work in the future. Not leaving behind anyone on our teams, because as you said, there's also this whole skill development thing that we have to be concerned with. We're fundamentally changing how some of this work happens. The reality is technology has always been changing though, right? If you go back to the emergence of the cloud, right? The traditional system administrator became maybe a cloud engineer. We had paths to help them along that journey. We have to continue investing in those paths to make sure that our junior software engineers can become senior engineers in the future.
I agree, Nathan. I also think that organizations that are trying to use AI as an alternative to hire the junior engineers is probably not the best approach, because I think we all had a rite of passage to get to where we are today. And junior engineers also need that same rite of passage, right, to learn as they're going through things. But one of the other pieces that I think I want to touch about on this, because you mentioned earlier about rollback and code and such, and one of the things about DevOps teams is to have that speed-centric discipline that balances out automation, accountability, and learning, right? This is a big part of what I saw in the report and how it highlights AI is transforming the DevOps teams for doing this. But when we look at these traditional approaches, so how really should organizations adapt traditional DevOps practices like the CI/CD pipeline, small batch workloads, and fast feedback loops to safely integrate AI while maintaining code quality and traceability?
Yeah, another great question, Paul. And this is, again, something where the DORA AI capabilities model, two of those capabilities you just actually mentioned. One is working in small batches. And this is the idea that we take large chunks of work and we break them down into smaller batches. We know through over a decade of research with DORA that one of the best ways to improve software delivery performance is to ship smaller changes. And if you're constantly or continually shipping smaller changes, those changes are easier to reason about. If something goes wrong, they're easier to roll back. When something goes wrong, they're less likely to impact all of your users. So you have a lot more control over that. That working in small batches gives you both speed and stability, and those safety mechanisms. You're actually reducing risk. Another one of those really fundamental practices, those DORA AI capabilities, is strong version control practices. The idea that we're checking into version control very frequently, that we can rely on the rollback capabilities that version control gives us. This is important as we look to having AI generate more and more of the code that we're actually looking to ship. We want AI to generate that code in smaller segments so that we have an opportunity to review that code and to really understand it. And like we said earlier, this is a big part of how the software engineer's role is changing. I'm going to spend much more time editing or reviewing code than I might have spent in the past writing code.
It's interesting, Nathan, because when I think about the stat that's been out there for many, many, many years of, a third of developers spend their time innovating, where 2/3 of their time are in maintenance. I think this really changes. It's a paradigm shift here. I think that there's a lot of, call it innovation, but it's understanding and cleaning up the code, making it work. You can call it maintenance, but there's a little bit of, I think it's a combination of maintenance and innovation that allows the job to be a little bit more enjoyable than just true maintenance of trying to figure out how things are working. So I think that's an interesting perspective there as well. But this year's report also emphasized the growing importance of AI governance, right? Which I totally understand, because as we start, utilizing AI and utilizing governance, compliance, and regulations, and more of the citizen developers are starting to use AI to build applications. We need to have continuous measurements and developer literacy in order to realize AI-driven performance gains, right? That's really a big part of this. But from your perspective, when we look at the information from the report and we look at just kind of shifts in the market that we're seeing, what are the most critical cultural and organizational shifts that need to happen for DevOps teams to leverage AI effectively without really introducing new risks or inefficiencies?
Yeah, one of those DORA AI capabilities is a clear and communicated stance on how you can use AI within your organization. Now, there's a little bit of a challenge here, honestly, because this space is moving so very quickly. We need a clear and communicated stance so that people in our organization know where it's acceptable to use AI, how I can use it, what data I can share with the models, and so forth. But the reality is that all of the technology is changing so quickly as well. So we run this risk of being too rigid with our policies on day one, and not creating policies that have a little bit of flexibility in them, or not continually reevaluating our policies and updating them with the latest emerging trends and the lessons that we're learning over time. So I think it is really, really important that we do have a clear and communicated stance so people understand what's accepted, what's permitted, but we are also open and willing to revisiting that stance and fine-tuning it over time as we continue to learn how AI is helping our organization today.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is so much here, Nathan, to unpack. There's so much to think about. The report was very comprehensive, to say the least, right? Uh, but as we come to a close here, where can the audience go? And do you have any closing thoughts for the audience? But where can they go to learn more about the issues?
Yeah, first and foremost, I would highly encourage you to go and read the full report. As Paul mentioned, it's pretty comprehensive. I think it's about 142 pages, so we certainly didn't have time to cover all of the depth and nuance here. But I would encourage you to go to dora.dev. That's where you can download the report from. And while you're there, you'll find a lot of other helpful resources and information, including the DORA community, which is a community of thousands of practitioners and leaders just like yourself coming together to do the most important thing with this research. And that most important thing is to take this research and put it into practice. And in order to do so, you have to kind of contextualize the findings of the research within your own organization and for your own team to really understand, how do I best get value out of this? I often encourage teams to use our findings as the hypotheses for your next experiment.
Nathan, it's always a pleasure having you on, and you always provide really insightful kind of conversation and discussions around this. This is really, really powerful. I do encourage the audience to read that, all 140 pages. It's really, really important. And no, it's good stuff. It really is. Nathan, thank you very much. Really appreciate you. And a big thanks to all of you who tuned in. We really appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But that wraps up this episode. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of application development. So whether you're deploying on the edge, building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social if you have any thoughts, questions, or just want to connect. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.